Hello everyone, my name is Prabh Nair and I'm working as a Chief Instructor at InfoSec Training.
Welcome to the session on Coffee with Prabh, and today we have a special guest, Mr. Suhas Krishnamurthy. One thing, what I know about Suhas Krishnamurthy for his writing skills on privacy. So we have a second speaker from privacy who's sharing their privacy experience about privacy management system and all that. And Mr. Suhas has a 8+ year of experience in a privacy and consulting. And in this session, we're going to discuss about how the privacy management system works in the organization. Thanks, Suhas, for your time.
Hi, thank you.
So Suhas, first of all, I would like to, thank you for, on behalf of entire community to taking out the time for this particular session. I know privacy consultants or privacy managers, their life is not very great when it comes to their case studies and all that, but taking out the time for this session, it will be great. And currently Mr. Suhas is working as a senior consultant for a Paramount Computer Systems, so he's known for the great company. And in this session, we're looking forward to have a great information on PIMS from Suhas.
Great, thank you so much, Prabh, for that introduction. And it's actually a pleasure to do this kind of session, because this actually helps in spreading awareness not only among the privacy consultants, but also it reaches further. It reaches the ultimate citizens of India and throughout the world. So that is what is more important over here. And when we talk about PIMS system, privacy information management system, so this is basically very similar to ISMS system, which is actually implemented across organizations. However, what this focuses is on basically the privacy aspect. So let me quickly share my screen and
Sure.
Give you an overview about PIMS, and then we'll also have a look at how exactly PIMS is implemented across an organization. And we'll also look at a couple of key challenges which organizations face when implementing a PIMS system.
Sure. But Suhas, before going to understand about PIMS and all that, is it okay? Can you just share your journey? What make, if it's okay, because it can be very useful for the subscribers to know, to the students or aspiring privacy consultant, that, okay, what make you to move into privacy? Because we have a multiple field, and what I can see, your profile, you were the engineer and then you moved to GRC, correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
And then you have core into privacy area, and then now you are a consultant. So we have a multiple field, like we have a GRC, we have a cloud and all that. What make you to go to privacy?
So Prabh, it's all about finding out the right opportunity at the right time. So when I started my career with GRC, so that is where I worked on a couple of regulations like HIPAA compliance.
Okay.
And HIPAA also contains very important aspects of PHI, and it also involves privacy.
Yeah.
So that is where the main interest developed, and that is where back in 2018 even GDPR went live, and organizations started taking importance into this kind of regulation. And one more very key element is to understand that how exactly privacy impacts each one of our lives, right? That is where interest developed into me also. Because we live in an environment in a digital age where our data can flow from any system to any system. Any organization can access any kind of data of you. So for example, you might receive any kind of spam messages to your mobile number, or you might get some spam emails on your email box, even though you might have not subscribed to them, right?
True.
So that is when it struck me that there has to be some kind of control put in place, wherein I get to choose what kind of emails I receive, or I get to choose what kind of SMS I receive, right? And this is exactly one of the drivers which led me into taking a journey with privacy. So since my transition from GRC to privacy, I have been completely focusing on privacy. I have completed various certifications such as CIPP, CIPM. I'm also an ISO 27701 lead auditor and a CDPO as well. So this is a very, very interesting journey once a person actually starts reading about privacy. So there are various intricate elements which people get to learn about.
Okay.
And they get to know that there are actually mechanisms to actually control the data the way you want, right? So that is what is
Yes.
more interesting.
Yes.
Right now, for a layman, if you see, they might receive any kind of spam messages, and they might be helpless, and they might not know what exactly to do.
True.
But that is where we as privacy consultants come into picture, and our job is basically bi-directional. One is to create awareness among the citizens, the customers, and everyone. And the second job is to help the organizations to comply to all these kind of regulations, and help the organizations in order to help their customers to exercise their rights.
Great.
So this is where my privacy journey started, and that is where I'm heading towards as well.
That is a one of the excellent information. And if someone want to start their career in privacy, okay, like I have seen a lot of people from being a lawyer, they working as an intern and they're working as a privacy consultant. So is it possible to share your 5 minutes experience on this area? Like those who are watching this video, might be some of the aspirants are looking for privacy as a career and they want to start their career in privacy also. So how to start their career in privacy? What is the first certification? Or any book or video references do you wish to suggest them?
Yeah, so starting a career in privacy, one has to keep in mind that privacy is a very, very dynamic field. It involves a lot of reading. It's not just reading one regulation, reading just a couple of clauses of the regulation and implementing a privacy program. It's not like that. So privacy is basically reading the case laws, reading various technology, reading how exactly privacy can be embedded into technology. Right? So there are various things which has to be kept in mind before starting a journey in privacy. That said, there are two options. Basically, there are engineers and lawyers who I have seen joining the privacy field. For engineers, generally, they prefer to go into the privacy technology side, whereas the lawyers, they generally prefer to go into the functional side of privacy, or probably into the legal side.
Okay.
Right? So for engineers, my recommendation would definitely be to start with regulatory reading. GDPR is, of course, considered as the Bible of the privacy regulation.
True.
You can start with GDPR reading, and there are a lot of resources online to start reading. Once you complete reading GDPR, once you undergo a certain level of training on the basics of privacy, only then I would suggest you go for certification, because certification is something which would actually enable you to get a job. But first of all, you need to understand whether you have an interest in privacy or not. Right? So that is why first start taking up any free courses online. There are multiple free courses. You can go through the regulations online. Do all of these pre-reading. Then if you're interested, then you can go ahead with CIPPE, which will basically make you understand the basics of privacy. Right?
Okay.
So once you understand the basics of privacy, there is something called a CIPM.
CIPM, yeah.
Yeah. CIPM is again, it is basically to understand how exactly to implement a privacy program framework across an organization. And that is one level higher than CIPPE. That is because this goes into the actual operational aspects to identify what kind of risks are there in the organization, how to mitigate the risk, how to implement policies, procedures, what are the auditing procedures. Everything will be covered in the CIPM exam.
Okay.
And CIPPA and CIPM exam is generally recommended for engineers. Generally recommended for the lawyers, right? Because they don't want to get into the technology aspect.
Okay.
Whereas for engineers who are completely aspiring to stay in the technology field as well as pursue opportunities in in the privacy field, for them I would recommend going ahead with CIPPE and then CIPT, Certified Information Privacy Technologist.
Okay.
So CIPT will talk about various privacy enhancing technologies, various security controls which can be put in place, like encryption, pseudonymization, tokenization, all these kind of controls. So yeah, it completely depends on a person's interest in what way they want to pursue privacy.
Okay.
And it's a conscious choice. But again, privacy is a very, very reading intensive career. That's why people have to be ready. If someone is thinking that doing a certification will help them, enter into privacy field, no. It will definitely not help in sustenance.
That is a most important point you have suggested, because when I was preparing for my CIPP, because I did my CIPPE and CIPM, I thought, okay, just reading a book and I will clear the exam. But the experience was completely different. You need to know in depth about GDPR, you need to know in depth about CCPA and all that, and then you can able to prepare for the CIPM and all that. I completely agree with that. So it was like, we talk about the privacy as a career. So one of the important thing in the organization they build is PIMS, which is called as a Privacy Information Management System. So what is this PIMS buzzword we heard about in terms of ISO, in terms of CIPM, or as a framework? So what is this PIMS all about?
So PIMS is basically a system of people, process, technology, which is implemented in an organization to ensure that the individuals who are associated with an organization remain in control of their data, right? So I'll quickly move on to the agenda. I'll explain what exactly PIMS is in the next slide. So in today's agenda, we'll be looking at what exactly PIMS is. We'll give an introduction about it. And then we'll also look at some of the key definitions, because there will be people who don't know what exactly the basic definitions of privacy are, right? So that is where we look at few key basic definitions. Then we'll also look at why organizations need to go for PIMS, right?
Okay.
That is very important. Then there are a couple of key elements which needs to be built in a PIMS system. We'll look at that, and we'll look at how exactly the ISO 27701 standard can be used to leverage, implementing a PIMS system within an organization.
Sure.
So PIMS definitely comes up with certain responsibilities for both controllers and processors, and there are a few documentation which has to be established in order to, ensure that you have the proof of implementation right in place.
Okay.
Once that is done, there are few industry focus areas which we'll be looking at, and also the key challenges which organizations face when they try to implement a PIMS system.
Okay.
So PIMS, as I told, it's a set of people, process, and technology controls or system which have to be put in place to ensure that personal data remains in control with people who are owners of that particular data.
Yes.
So what this means is that it can be any kind of technical administration controls, or it can be people, process, technology controls, which is generally in alignment with any kind of privacy regulation. To ensure that personal data is protected when an organization is processing.
Okay.
So one of the key industry standards which support PIMS implementation is ISO 27701, which was released in the year 2019.
Okay.
One very important point to note over here is this is not a standalone compliance standard, right? So ISO 27001 ISMS implementation is mandatory to ensure that you can go ahead with ISO 27701 certification.
Okay.
So this means that security aspect is very, very critical, because ISO 27001 talks primarily about implementing a security system.
True.
Once you have that properly in your environment, then you can move on to the next step, which is protecting personal information and implementing additional controls as per PIMS requirement.
Okay. As you see, information security is a process which is used to protect different type of information, and PII is one type of information, and secrecy is something we are achieving in PII. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like that is why we say that it's a mandatory requirement to have a 27001 to go for 27701, right, Suhas?
That is right. That is right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is the transition period? If someone want to go for 27, the company is already 27001 and they want to go for 27701. So how much time it will take for the transition? Is it depending upon the scope, or is it depending upon?
There are various factors which help you in determining the actual time required to comply to ISO 27701. So first of all, it depends on the kind of maturity which the privacy program is having. Suppose the organization doesn't have any kind of maturity, they are at level 0, they don't have a privacy policy, they don't have any kind of data discovery done, then that means it is definitely going to take some time for them to establish this whole privacy framework and then conduct PIAs, identify risk, mitigate those risks, and then go into the operational phase.
True.
But whereas if there are organizations which are directly complying to certain regulations like GDPR or CCPA, and they want to comply to ISO 27701 in order to implement additional privacy controls, in that case there will be some delta controls which will have to be implemented, and that is where the implementation time will take less in order to comply to this particular standard.
Okay.
But on an average, it should take about 6 to 8 months in order to implement all the controls.
Wow.
Yeah, Yeah.
It is not small. I thought it is basically one of the article requirement, and we'll invest. That is something is eye opener for me. I thought okay 6 to 7 weeks, but it is a month, so it is really a painful task to be frank. Then hats
Yeah,
off you to guys.
it is a painful task. That is because organizations really don't know what kind of personal data they are currently handling
True,
and
true,
how they are handling it, right? So that is the
true.
first step which has to be implemented in the PIMS program,
Agree,
and that
agree.
itself takes a lot of effort.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Sure.
So also one of the key elements to understand PIMS is that PIMS is generally in alignment with most of the regulations. So even if you take ISO 27701, the Annexure D of ISO 27701 directly maps all the GDPR controls to this particular standard.
Okay.
So if you are going to implement the ISO 27701 PIMS program, you can be rest assured that you will be implementing most of the control requirements of GDPR.
Okay.
However, there will be some delta effort which will be required in order to notify the supervisory authority in case of a breach and those kind of things, because that is not given in detail in the PIMS requirement. PIMS
True.
will just have a guidance, right?
True.
Whereas when you take a regulation, that will actually contain what are the steps needed to notify a breach.
True.
So some delta effort will be required, but again, you can be rest assured that GDPR requirements will get covered in ISO 27701 PIMS implementation.
Okay. Okay.
Now, coming on to the key definitions. So people keep saying, what is PII? What is personal data? What is the difference between the two, right? So PII is any information that can be used to link that particular information with an individual.
Okay.
And a very common doubt which we get is whether corporate email IDs or whether any employee ID number, right? That is PII or not. So if a corporate email ID is generally a group email ID, something like privacy@xyz.com, right? In that case, that is not PII because that does not relate directly to an individual.
Individual, yeah. Like
Whereas,
db@xyz.com or tech@xyz.com.
exactly.
Where the mail will be copied to the multiple people. So it's more like a group email. So that is not something related to the PII.
That is right.
Okay. Okay.
Whereas an email ID, which is assigned to a single person in a company. So for example, it can be suhas@paramountassure.com, right? So this is considered as PII. Because that particular email ID is linked only to me. No one else can have that particular email ID.
But that have an enterprise information. Like example, if I'm communicating anything with you, Suhas, on a your corporate ID, we are discussing about the business informations. We are discussing about the business process, and that is something owned by the company board of directors and all that. So is it still part of a PII? Because
see, that email ID still belongs to me, right? I am the only person who can access that particular email. And if at all, so PII depends on linkability. So for example, if you have my email ID, okay, suhas.something@paramount.com, and that is used with, suppose you get to know my date of birth. Okay, in that case, these two data can directly actually point to me.
Exactly.
Right? So that is why this will still be considered as PII.
Okay.
And PII, that's what. Yeah, PII basically depends on linkability, and people often misunderstand that. Even though if you take only the date of birth, for example, date of birth on its own is not a personal data.
Exactly.
But it will be considered as PII because date of birth, along with any other parameter which is associated with me, can lead to identification of me.
Best example, PAN card, where we are giving a PAN number with date of birth. We can able to link. Yeah, that's
exactly.
True.
Yeah. So that's where PII, understanding of PII is very, very important, and the classification of PII in an organization is very, very important.
Okay, it's a very good definition you have given. Like any information that can be used to establish link with between the information as well person. So that is a really a good statement. Yeah.
Yes. So PIMS definition we just saw. It is a system which addresses the protection of privacy of all the people who are associated with an organization. Now coming to PII, principal or data subject, these two terms are used interchangeably. So according to certain regulations, people are called as data subject, or somewhere it is called as PII principal.
Okay.
So these are natural person to whom a PII actually relates to. So if you take an organization, a PII principal or data subject can be customers, it can be employees, it can be your staffing people, or it can be your vendor representatives or anyone, be it anyone, even your board of directors.
Okay.
Anyone who's associated with an organization will be considered as a PII principal or a data subject.
Okay.
Okay. And PII controller and processors are two different organizations. And PII controller is basically the main organization which determines the purpose and means of processing of personal data. That means that this particular organization tells how exactly personal data is collected, how exactly personal data can be processed, how exactly personal data can be retained or disposed.
Okay.
The primary,
No, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Whereas a PI processor is an organization which takes instruction from a PII controller in order to process personal data, right? So the PII processor by itself cannot actually determine the purpose of processing. So what this means is, suppose the controller is telling that you can use this set of personal data for marketing activities, right? For email marketing purposes.
Yeah.
The same database cannot be used by PII processor for sending out SMSs unless the controller authorizes this particular organization.
Okay. So, but any example, Suhas, because this is always a debatable topic on sometime when I did some videos on GDPR and all that, I always receive this query like can one same company, but what you said is possible be a controller and processor, or is it possible within the one company we can have a one controller, one processor, or is it only within two entities? So it would be great if you can give an example of that, Suhas.
Definitely, it's a very, very good question, because every company will act as a PII controller as well as a processor.
Okay.
So when you take any service provider company, in that case, the service provider will basically act on the instruction of a customer, right?
True.
That customer becomes the PII controller and the service provider becomes the PII processor. This is case number one. Okay. Now take that same service provider. The service provider will have their own internal processes for onboarding, for HR onboarding, for salary processing, for various other activities, right? For their internal employees. In that case, the organization, the service provider, will act as a PII controller.
Okay.
So in this case, the service provider acts as a PII processor in the first case, as a controller in the second case.
Understood.
Yeah.
So it is all about the function they perform, which is mapped.
Yeah, it is all about the function they perform and the kind of authority they are having over the data.
Okay. No issues. Yeah. So who is ultimately accountable for the PI, controller and processor? It is always debatable again.
So see, accountable is controller, but again, the accountable, some kind of responsibility is transferred to the PII processors as well through something called as a data processing agreement. Right?
Okay.
So similar to a contract which is established between two organizations, a data processing agreement is established between two organizations to ensure that the accountability still remains with the PII processor also, just in case something goes wrong with the processor's end. So for example, if you take any kind of data breach which happens on a PII processor, right? So even though the controller is performing regular audits, the controller is having an assurance that PII processor is having everything from a regulatory perspective. Still, there is always a possibility of a data breach at the processor end.
True.
Right? And if at all any kind of breach happens at the processor end, in that case, the controller cannot take the whole accountability for that particular breach. Because there has been some kind of lapse from the processor end. That is why that is what led to the breach. Right?
True.
So some kind of accountability transfer happens through this data processing agreement, wherein both processor and controller remains accountable to any kind of activity which is done as part of the personal data processing.
Okay. Fine.
Sorry. Now looking at the benefits of PIMS. So why organizations generally need to go for PIMS? The reason I'm telling need over here and not recommended is because PIMS is a very, very robust implementation. It does not focus on just the high level requirements. It goes deep into implementing security controls. It goes deep into implementing privacy controls. It ensures that any kind of relationship which is developed between two organizations remains, protected. All these various kinds of, advantages are there. And one of the main advantage of implementing a PIMS system is protecting of PII, which is the ultimate, aim
Exactly.
of implementing any kind of privacy program in an organization.
That's true.
And with the growing awareness of privacy among across the world, so people are knowing that organizations cannot take their personal data at liberty anymore.
Okay.
So organizations are accountable for whatever processing they are doing, and PIMS basically helps to build a trust within these customers and individuals across the world to show that organizations still respect their privacy and protect their personal data. That is where the first advantage comes into picture.
Okay. But is it necessary that, when I'm implementing PIMS and all that, we only need to follow ISO 27701, or we can have some mandatory requirement for PMS and we can run that show in the organization? Is it possible, or?
Yeah, it is definitely possible. It is
Okay.
definitely possible.
Any
So
frameworks? Any frameworks we have for the PIMS apart from ISO? Like ISO is a standard, definitely.
Yeah, ISO is standard, definitely. So what we have seen organizations do is generally even look at privacy maturity model, right, by
Okay.
AICPA.
Okay.
So that is something which also defines all these set of controls, and that is not a compliance standard. Those are just recommendations.
Okay.
And you can take that as a framework, and you can actually one of the main advantages of PMM model is that it helps you in assessing the current state privacy maturity, and it also helps you in defining the target state privacy maturity.
Understood.
So there are level 0 to level 5 in the maturity model, which organizations can target to achieve.
Okay.
So this is one more standard which definitely organizations can look at. But generally, PIMS is, since it was released recently in 2019 and it aligns with GDPR requirement, that is why organizations prefer to go ahead with ISO 27701.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. So now talking about the privacy risks, right? So when an organization implements a privacy program, the ultimate aim is to understand the privacy risk. Once the privacy risk is understood, it can be managed effectively. So how it can be managed? It can be managed to a very similar way in which security risks are actually managed, right? So it can either be implementation of security controls, it can be implementation of management controls, or it can be implementation of any kind of contracts between organizations. So these all lead to managing of privacy risks very effectively.
Okay.
And PIMS also states that there needs to be dashboards and metrics which have to be defined by an organization to ensure that privacy risks are measured at a regular interval.
Okay.
So that in case any sudden privacy risk arises due to some new processing activity introduced by any department within an organization, that is recognized immediately and it is mitigated immediately.
Okay.
Now, improving the privacy posture, this is what we just discussed, privacy maturity model, right?
True.
So basically organizations can define their current state maturity by having a gap assessment done and through building a privacy strategy, which will basically talk about a long-term strategy to ensure that all the privacy modules are implemented and also audited, and there's a continual improvement. Till that stage, privacy maturity can be assessed and it can be targeted to ensure that there's a continual improvement in terms of the privacy posture of an organization.
Okay.
This is very, very important because once you implement the PIMS model, right, and you have the required documentation in place, and you also show the kind of maturity you have achieved, this gives an assurance to the regulators as well that yes, you are having a continuously governing privacy program in an organization. It's not just a one-time activity.
Okay,
this is very important. And many organizations I have seen, they implement privacy program and then they just leave at it. Then they conduct annual audit as part of the internal audit. They find out few NCs, they just highlight it, and they implement certain controls and leave it. There's no continuous monitoring which happens. So that is where this improvement of privacy posture plays a very important role, and a continuous compliance monitoring is required.
It's a debatable also. Like, when we go for 27,001, hope you can understand. On papers we have a different 27,001, and on the
Agree.
certification, and in the reality we have a different thing. But when it comes to privacy, I'm sure that, okay, people are more serious about privacy because it is directly linked with the law.
Right.
Because there will be a penalties, and it is hefty penalties, which is also India has also initiated. So I'm sure, like the point which you have shared, so as it's a very most important point, but the worst part is not being followed by many enterprise. They just implement as a part of a contract job by the contractor, and then just for the sake of compliance they will drive that thing, and later on when they face some issues, then they got a learning, and then they basically hire a full-time consultant to manage the privacy. Like, is like this is what I've seen in some of the enterprise. Like, are you agree with that? Is it happening where the privacy jobs are more contractual basis? Because it is not something a revenue generating job, but it is more like a compliance based, like the same we have a GRC sector. So what do you
Right.
what is your observation about that? Like, review definitely need to be done as a best practice, but do you think so that, okay, the company should make the profile also, as a on roles, instead of having a contractual basis where you just call the consultant, do the review, and just implement and get it done? Like, what is your observation on that area?
See, it again depends on the region. If you take Europe,
Hmm.
European Union, right,
Hmm.
their privacy is taken very, very seriously because you might have seen a lot of fines are being levied on organizations for which are not complying to GDPR requirements, right?
True.
That is where
True.
accountability comes into picture.
Yeah.
And privacy is a space wherein it's not just internal to the organization, so
True.
it is external to the organization as well. So
Okay.
if at all I, as a data subject, I come to know that my data is handled by any organization in an ineffective manner, then I have all the right to go to the regulatory authority and file a complaint.
True. I
Right?
agree.
So that is where there is more risk, or in terms of regulatory penalties or the compensation which has to be given to the data subjects, right?
Agree.
And a lot of finance is involved in this kind of role.
True.
That is where generally a DPO is first of all recommended to actually be appointed on a full-time position who is independent of any other responsibilities. And it is the responsibility of DPO to have a continuously monitoring governance structure
Mhm.
to ensure that all the privacy risks are mitigated.
Oh, okay.
So whereas there are regulations which do not mandate any kind of appointment of DPO,
Okay.
that is where it becomes very debatable as to whether the organization will actually have a continuously governing privacy model or not.
That was a reason that I asked that question.
Yeah,
That does it require contract? And that was a good point that you have covered. Thanks for us.
sure, Rob, no problem. But again, there are companies which opt for DPO as a service as well.
Okay.
There are, I mean, GDPR does not specifically state that the person has to be on a full-time employment. It can be on
Okay.
contractual. It can be on contractual basis as well.
Uh-huh.
But the issue is that there is a lot of accountability which goes on the shoulder of DPO. It's not
Okay.
that easy to take up that job.
True.
So that's why even if an organization takes DPO as a service,
Mm-hmm.
in that case they are still safe. Uh, and they can be rest assured that the privacy program implementation happens in a good way.
Okay. So you talk about a lot of benefits of PIMS. So as a DPO, do you what are the major challenge you have seen when you're implementing a PIMS in the organization?
Yeah. So the first and foremost challenge is stakeholder buy-in, because privacy is relatively a new topic across the world.
True.
People do not understand privacy, especially the technologists, the IT department, and the engineers. Right? For
Okay. Yeah.
them, including additional set of controls into applications, into databases, all these seem very, very unnecessary. They don't understand this.
Until they got a lesson.
Exactly, until they get a lesson. And when it comes to the actual executive management, as you said, privacy is a cost center. It's not a revenue center.
Same with security. I agree.
Yeah. And implementing additional controls, and especially if you take privacy technology, right? All these technologies are not cheap. These are extremely expensive in order to implement.
I agree.
And they do not get enough stakeholder buy-in to implement. That's where we have seen a half-baked privacy program implemented across various organizations.
True.
So, a proper strategy has to be developed, which is very important in order to, get stakeholder buy-in. overnight, none of the stakeholders or none of the board of directors will approve, a lot of money to be put into a privacy program.
Agree.
So it has to be on phases. It has to be shown that there are, benefits which can be reaped on a phase-wise manner.
So, what is your success factor behind convincing a management on privacy? Do you wish to share some ideas? But might be it is useful for the viewers who are watching this video.
See, when it comes to convincing the management, it depends on how you're actually approaching the management. I would never approach a management stating that I want a privacy automation in the first place.
Okay.
I would first say that these are the basic regulatory requirements. These are good to have controls. And, these are basically what are required in order to operationalize privacy. And then the next stage will go into, privacy automation and increasing the efficiency. If you go into the increasing efficiency in the first place, and you don't even know what exactly personal data you're having, first of all, the management will not approve it. Secondly, they will not understand why you're going ahead with efficiency improvement when you don't have a process itself. So you need to take it in a very, very faceful manner to ensure that privacy program is implemented.
Agree. That is a good point, and it should be mapped with the business objective. Things which is
Definitely,
not.
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Privacy should be mapped with the business objective, and even if organizations are finding it difficult to map it to business objectives, they need to actually modify the business objective.
Okay.
I have seen various organizations which are totally privacy unfriendly. Right? They are basically focused only on business and generating revenues. That is where organizations might have to rethink the way they are handling personal data and might have to align their business objectives to privacy objectives.
That is a point I'm going to note down, because this is something is new for me. But yeah, that was a very good statement you said. Not privacy friendly. I agree with that. Yeah. So when it comes to the requirement, okay, so this is the benefits we have in the PIMS. So what is next after, once we have the benefits? Okay, we understood.
Yeah.
Okay,
so once we understand the benefits, so we will be talking about the key elements. So when I say key elements, these are not exactly directly extracted from any kind of standard or something, but these are the basic requirements which goes into a implementation of a PIMS model, right?
Okay.
So first of all, an organization needs to define and have internal processes for privacy.
Okay.
So for example, if you take privacy, there are multiple processes. First one becomes transparency. How exactly you communicate to data subject about the processing activities. Second becomes taking consents from the data subjects. Third is having a process for data subject rights. Fourth is having a data subject rights data breach management.
Okay.
Fifth is having audit procedures for privacy, right? There are multiple internal processes which have to be defined within an organization to ensure that a PIMS system is up and running in an organization.
Understood.
Now the second step is basically analyzing the risk. So once you have the basic crux or the strategy and the basic process in place, you need to start implementing that process. That is where analyzing the risk comes into picture.
Okay.
Right? So analyzing the risk is nothing but, in privacy terms, it's called as conducting privacy impact assessments or data protection impact assessments.
Okay.
And these assessments are generally conducted at the beginning of the implementation of a privacy program across the organization. And once the complete understanding of all the privacy risk is obtained and the relevant controls are implemented, during the operational phase, PIAs and DPIAs are generally conducted on an annual basis or as and when it is needed. So for example, if HR department plans to onboard a new tool for any kind of employment management, in that case, that is a new process which is added, right, within the organization. In that case as well, a PIA or a DPIA will have to be triggered. So that is where continuously analyzing the risk comes into picture, which directly correlates to the previous point which we discussed, like on continuous governance, which is required.
Continuous governance, yeah.
The third thing is record keeping. Privacy is all about documentation. Whether you have the right set of documentation with you to show to the regulators, to show to the stakeholders, and to show to your customers that you are protecting the personal data in the correct and adequate way. Right?
Okay.
That is where record keeping comes into picture. The organization needs to have all the PIAs, DPIAs documented. A privacy risk register has to be documented. Record of processing activity has to be documented. Any kind of breach which happens, that has to be documented. So anything and everything related to privacy happening within an organization needs to be documented by the data privacy office. That is where record keeping comes into picture.
Okay.
Now, responsibility, even though I'm telling it a bit later, but this again goes along with the internal process. So responsibility has to be clearly defined within the organization.
Okay.
So privacy is not a standalone, project in an organization. Each and every person who is involved with an organization is involved in privacy, right? So for example, it's not just the data privacy office. Data privacy office is, of course, accountable for any kind of happening regarding personal data. But there are data privacy champions, there are department heads, there are employees of various departments who actually handle personal data on a day-to-day basis, right?
Example?
And they need to ensure that they comply with the policies and procedures set out by the data privacy office.
Okay. Any examples, like, when you say the people and departments, like you mean to say accounts, finance?
Yeah. So
Okay.
for example, if you take any kind of finance, if you take finance department, right? And for payroll processing, finance will have access to any kind of personal data from the HR database in order to correlate that HR database to the salary processing activities, right?
Okay.
In that case, the data privacy office has definitely defined how exactly each and every team should access that particular HR database and how exactly the finance team can access, personal data within the HR database.
Okay.
But it is the responsibility of HR team to provide appropriate access to the finance team to ensure that only required information is accessed by the HR team.
Okay.
And also, it is the responsibility of finance team to ensure that when they collect that particular kind of personal data related to employees, it is not disclosed to any other team across the organization, or they disclose only the required information to other departments or probably the vendor who's processing the payroll.
Okay.
So if you see in this chain, a DPO gets involved. DPO, a data privacy office, has certain responsibility. The HR team, who's actually the owner of that particular database, has some kind of responsibility. The finance team, who actually utilizes this particular data from HR team, has a responsibility, right?
Great.
So responsibility flows across the organization, and it's not just with the data privacy office.
Okay.
Now coming to confidentiality. Confidentiality is basically maintaining, security of the personal data. That is which we spoke about ISO 27001 and implementation of security controls help in maintaining the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. Even though 27001 acts on the overall data which an organization processes, that those set of controls are applicable to personal data as well, and that is where security for privacy comes into picture.
Okay.
And PIMS also define certain responsibilities with respect to controllers and processors. And all these responsibilities will look in the next slide, how we are going to actually deal with various kind of responsibilities which the controllers and processors have. And last but not the least is training. Training is very, very important because as I said, a lot of stakeholders are involved in personal data processing and in the PIMS implementation. And the role which each and every team plays in an organization is different.
Okay.
So DPO office, being the owner of privacy process, for them certain kind of training has to be given.
Okay.
Whereas the data privacy champions, who actually represent their particular departments for privacy processes, they will be given certain kind of training. Whereas end user training for employees will be different.
Okay.
And training for the management, who actually are governing the particular data privacy processes, for them the training will be different.
True.
And again, upskilling of employees is also very important. That is where training comes into picture. So there might be people who would be interested in various certifications, or they want to become a DPO in the organization. So that is where again training comes into picture. It's not just about creating awareness; it's about upskilling as well. That is where training comes into picture.
Agree.
So these are the key elements which come into implementation of a privacy program. Now, this structure, the high-level process which we see, is basically how exactly a PIMS can be implemented. This is not the only way, but this is one of the recommended ways in which a PIMS can be implemented.
Okay.
So when we talk about, and again, if you see, this is very similar to how exactly an ISO 27001, implementation looks like. So first of all, we need to understand the context of the organization. When we tell about context of the organization must understand who are the important stakeholders who are involved in the privacy processes, right? So it can be data privacy office, it can be all the data subjects, it can be employees, it can be customers, it can be anyone related. So we need to understand from their perspective who all are involved in this particular organization and who all will be impacted by this particular project.
Okay.
The second thing to understand is what are the interests of these particular parties, right? What are the particular interests of these, what do we say? These people who are involved in this particular project. So for example, there might be any kind of, there might be a finance department for whom, a certain banking regulation or certain finance regulation might be applicable. And they might want to club the privacy process along with, certain privacy requirements of that particular financial sector regulation. So that is where we need to understand what their requirement is, and we need to integrate this process.
Okay.
This is where requirement understanding goes into picture. And the next thing is understanding the scope of the particular privacy program. So if you take a multinational organization, they might have multiple subsidiaries. They might be present across different geographies in across the world. And they might not have the exact budget or, the kind of resources to implement a privacy program across the globe.
Yeah.
So that is where it is important to, understand how exactly scoping can be done. So for example, an organization can probably target India-based operations first.
Yeah.
To comply to PIMS requirement. And then once it reaches a certain level maturity, then that particular privacy program scope can be expanded to other regions, right? This becomes easier, and this becomes also, compliant to regulation, depending on what kind of regulation the organization wants to, follow. Now, when we talk about leadership plays a very, very important role in terms of, defining the vision and mission of privacy. So as we discussed earlier, it is important to align the business objectives with the privacy objectives of the organization. And this can be done only by the leadership of the organization.
Okay.
The leadership also helps in, allocating budgets, forming the actual or getting the actual resources required to implement a privacy project. It also helps in providing any kind of assistance throughout the operational phase. And there are various aspects in which leadership plays a very important role. For example, if an organization goes into managing the privacy program through automation, that is where a leadership approval is required, and the leadership must actually get involved to ensure that the privacy program actually utilizes the privacy automation tool in an effective way. Even though the accountability will still lay with the data privacy office, leadership's guidance and governance is very important in implementation of a privacy program.
Okay.
The leadership also helps to form all the privacy policies, procedures. Their approval is required on all the procedures in order to ensure that it aligns with the actual objectives of the organization. So once the leadership gets involved and the basic structure is formed, then comes the planning phase. In the planning phase, basically, the first step is to form a strategy. As I mentioned before, a privacy program is not something which can be implemented in one shot. It is a continuously occurring activity, right? So that is where a strategy has to be developed. So for the next 6 months, the organization will focus on so and so activities to ensure that personal data is protected. Once that maturity is reached, in the next 2 years, these activities will be performed, and the next 3 years, these activities will be performed. Such a strategy has to be formed to ensure that there is proper planning and proper implementation assistance, which is required from different departments. Now, once that is done, it is important to develop something called as a privacy risk assessment plan.
Okay, right? but here I want to ask one question, Suhas. When it comes to a strategy document, okay, so what is the content included in a strategy document? Is it a one page, or what exactly in the strategy document we include?
See, basically, privacy comprises of 6 things, right? First one is basically understanding where exactly your privacy personal data is lying and how exactly you're classifying them. classifying that data.
Hmm.
That is step 1. Step 2 contains, identifying the privacy risk relating to all the privacy activities.
Hmm.
The third step is implementing a consent management system, or implementing the appropriate technology to ensure that you're processing data in a lawful basis.
Okay.
The fourth thing is basically having a data subject rights management process in place to ensure that you're helping your customers to exercise their rights.
Okay.
And the fifth one is basically optimizing all of these activities.
Understood.
So all these kind of, again, what I'm trying to say is, in a strategy document, it's not a one-page document or something. This will go for about 10-15 pages.
Oh.
It will lay out for each and every activity which I just listed out. What are the activities which are involved in all these documents? How much timeline is required? How much effort will be required? And what will be the target date to achieve all of these activities? Right?
Okay.
So all of these will be documented in the particular document. And also the timelines is very important, because it is not possible to, so even though it is important to have a data subject rights management process in an organization, and it can be developed in the first phase itself, but achieving the kind of efficiency which is required in that particular process might not be the priority at present.
Understood.
Right? Because data subject is relatively a new topic, and organizations are not receiving a lot of data subject requests as of now.
Agree.
So they can park it for after 6 months, or probably after 1 year, in terms of achieving the efficiency which is required.
Okay, because why I asked this question, because sometime what happened, I was doing some research on the privacy side, and one of our customer has a requirement to integrate some of the privacy thing in the product. So I was just searching for the sample for privacy strategy. So wherever I was searching, I'm getting a sample of privacy policy. So I thought, is the privacy policy itself is a strategy? Because if you talk about from a security point of view, first we build a strategy, then we have a policy, then we have a program, and then we implement the metrics. Is it the same follow in the privacy also, like PIMS?
Yes, agree. It's same. So a privacy strategy document is completely different from a policy.
Okay.
Policy is, again, when it comes to privacy, right? Policy and notice are two different documents. This is where people get confused a lot.
Okay.
So privacy strategy is a document which basically talks about long-term planning of how exactly to prioritize each and every privacy activity.
True.
And how exactly to achieve all of these, and who are the key stakeholders. All these will be documented, right? A privacy policy is internal to an organization.
Okay.
This will basically tell all the employees how exactly privacy processes have to be followed by each and every employee.
Okay.
Right? Whereas a privacy notice is external to an organization. So this is a notice which, if you access any kind of website, so for example, if you take OneTrust or security.ai platform, and you scroll to the bottom, right, in that you will see something called as a privacy notice. And this notice is basically targeted to all the visitors of the website, mentioning how exactly their personal data will be used, right? So this is what privacy notice is, and this has got nothing to do with internal employees. This is completely external to the organization.
Okay.
And another document which is generally created along with privacy notice is something called as a cookie notice.
Okay.
You might be seeing a lot of cookie banners which are popping up on the websites.
We wish to accept the cookie.
Yeah, to accept the cookies and all. So in the banner itself, there will be something called as, a cookie policy link which will be given, or a cookie notice link.
Okay.
And this document only talks about how exactly cookies are collected, or how exactly the personal data collected by cookies are processed by the organization.
Okay.
So there are multiple documents when it comes to privacy, and that is where understanding each and every document becomes very crucial to implement in the privacy program.
Okay. So as if you want to have a water, you can have a water, because
Yeah.
you have to speak. Please. I'm sorry.
No, that's
I really
completely
feel bad. So I think, guys, we have a very interesting session, and to be frank, this is something of a more detailed presentation I have seen. And to be frank, Suhas bhai, I want to accept, and I have to say one thing, that okay, I have some doubts regarding this area. It was a free training for me.
It's my pleasure. I mean, these are very, very few intricate things which generally are missed out. And,
exactly.
And it is important.
That's why I asked those questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I think we can continue now, right?
Yeah.
So coming to the same planning stage, there are again, similar to how exactly it happens in ISMS, there are two more steps. First one is creating a privacy risk treatment plan, risk assessment plan, and creating a privacy risk treatment plan.
Okay.
Right? So in the risk assessment plan, this is very similar to the PIA methodology, which we spoke about, in which the organization needs to create a document which specifically states under what circumstances PIAs have to be triggered, and how exactly privacy risks have to be identified. And in the risk treatment plan, it should call out on what basis of risk, what kind of controls have to be implemented, and what are the steps which have to be taken to ensure that the privacy risks are mitigated.
Okay.
So this concludes the planning phase. Now coming to the support phase. Support phase is extremely important because this is where the actual teams get involved, right? So in this phase, basically, the leadership has to ensure that the appropriate resources are deployed for implementing a privacy program. Awareness is created among the employees and the required stakeholders to ensure that they know that such a privacy program is going to be implemented in the organization, and they understand their roles and responsibilities with respect to this particular plan. And also communication is important. It's not just enough to create all these, risk treatment plans or risk assessment plan on creating a privacy strategy. So it is important to communicate all of these to the required stakeholders, and this is what forms under the support stage.
Okay.
Now, in the operation stage, this is exactly where the assessment of privacy risk happens, right?
Okay.
So conducting of PIA, and then once you conduct a PIA, understand the risk. Depending on the risk, what kind of controls have to be implemented. These are decided by Data Privacy Office. So once the Data Privacy Office gives all the recommendations to the different departments on what kind of controls have to be implemented, the departments have to start implementing those kind of controls and give a confirmation back to the Data Privacy Office. Then again, a risk assessment is done to ensure that, to assess the kind of risk rating which has gone down or gone up. That has to be understood, right? And once that is done, then comes the performance evaluation. And performance evaluation involves various stages. So first of all, defining the privacy metrics, which is extremely difficult because there are various concepts in privacy, and metrics have to be developed for each and every kind of concept which is there in privacy. So if you take one example, like data subject rights. For data subject rights itself, an organization can develop easily around 7 to 8 metrics to measure how exactly the rights procedure is working within their organization, right? So defining this metric is extremely important, and this metric should actually help the organization in the improvement stage.
Okay.
There's no use of just collecting the data which is not usable, right?
Okay.
So that is where defining these metrics play very important. So once that is done, you understand where you stand from your metrics, right? Generally, organizations also go for internal audits, and this is a very common question which we get is, does privacy need a dedicated internal audit, or can it be included as part of the security internal audit, right? This is a very common question.
Because I've seen in companies where privacy was a part of assurance team, and in some cases I've seen the privacy is a part of an internal audit. So it was my next question about to ask, but thank you that you have raised.
That is very important. And see, privacy does not explicitly, none of the regulations or PIMS, it does not say that there is a dedicated audit required. It just says that the audit which your internal audit which you're conducting, right, that covers all the elements of privacy. It ensures that all the controls of data privacy are covered.
Okay.
Right? So it doesn't matter if you include it as part of your assurance audit, or it does not matter if you cover it as part of your security audit. Till the time you are able to prove that you have covered all the controls of the data privacy requirement, that should suffice.
Okay.
And there are cases, and this is not related to PIMS, this is related to regulations, right? There are cases in which the regulators might ask for certain audit reports which the organization has conducted. So even in that case, there is no specific requirement that a specific privacy audit report has to be given. If you have a comprehensive audit report which covers privacy, that should be well and good to go, and satisfy the audit requirements.
True. Okay.
And once the audit requirements are met and you have the required report, management involvement is very crucial to understand what are the findings of the audit are. And if at all the privacy strategy has to be redefined, or it has to be taken in a different direction to ensure that the privacy program is realigned to certain requirements. One very important case over here is, for example, if a company is operating out of India right now, and they plan to actually move to they actually plan to expand their operations to Europe, right? In that case, the privacy strategy has to be rethought. It cannot still remain aligned to exactly the Indian privacy requirements, right? Because GDPR requirements will come into picture. So that is where the improvement phase also comes into picture. An improvement phase, even though I have put it in the last over here, this is not something which has to be necessarily taken at the last stage. Improvement can happen on a continuous basis in privacy program. And that is where management review comes into picture and management guidance comes into picture.
Okay.
So the feedback of the improvement areas directly goes again into the context of the organization, in which the scoping can be reassessed. And if at all any interested parties are increased or reduced, that can be understood. And the leadership can again redefine the way the privacy program has to be taken forward.
Okay.
So this is the complete, the process or the loop which generally PIMS program requires. This is very similar to ISO 27001 requirement, because this is again an extension of ISO 27001.
True. So do we have any kind of like any example of metrics that we are using to measure the success of the PIMS and all that?
Yeah. So PIMS is not measured at the project level, right? So PIMS is generally measured at a module level. As I said, so for example, if you take consent management system, right? So one very important metric is how many reconsents are given or how many consents are revoked.
Understood.
Depending on that, businesses can understand what is going wrong or what is going right.
Okay.
Similar to data subject rights. If you take data subject rights, in that one of the key metric is SLA.
True.
So for each and every data subject right, depending on the regulation, there is a timeline which is specified. So for example, if my company receives the data subject rights, and according to the regulation, I need to respond back within 30 days since I received the request. In that case, the metric should clearly state that what are the data subject rights which are going to breach the timeline, or what are the data subject rights which you have responded within timeline. And all these kind of metrics will actually help in assessing and improving your process within your organization.
True.
So as I said, privacy as a whole, cannot have any kind of individual metrics. There are multiple metrics across modules which needs to be defined.
Okay. Because I was an impression, because until as you don't have a matrix, you can't measure something. So that was only my
Yeah, metrics is definitely required for continuous improvement. Yes.
That's the most important.
So for example, if you take in case of security, in security you cannot have a single metric for the whole program, right?
True.
There will be multiple metrics. Similar to that in PIMS also, multiple metrics are defined for multiple modules or multiple requirements of data privacy.
Okay. Yeah, that was a most important point I was about to ask. Thank you so much.
Now, coming to the controller and processor requirements. So there are 4 kinds of broad level requirements which PIMS talks about. First one is conditions for collection and processing. This directly relates to the transparency and accountability principle of data privacy. Now, the second one is obligations to PII principles or data subjects. So as you know, the objective of PIMS is basically to empower the data subjects and ensure that they remain in control of their personal data. That is where the data subject rights comes into picture, and also the consent required from data subjects to process personal data comes into picture. This is covered as part of the obligations to PII principles.
Okay.
Now the third thing is privacy by design and default. Privacy is no more reactive. So right now something more is happening. Privacy enhancing technologies are coming into picture, and privacy is becoming more and more proactive right now. So privacy is being embedded into the system or product lifecycle itself. So since a product is even imagined, privacy has to be thought behind, and then only it can be imagined.
Okay.
That is how organizations are approaching right now. So, for example, if a company is going to develop a SaaS-based solution, and that particular SaaS-based solution is going to collect any kind of data as part of the registration form, right? Then there needs to be a consent mechanism put in place to ensure that the data is collected according to the lawful basis. And
Okay.
this is where privacy by design and default comes into picture, right?
That was a point. Yeah.
Yes. And PII sharing, transfer, and disclosure is also very important, because personal data cannot be shared as and when needed.
True.
There are certain controls which has to be put in place. So access controls have to be put in place. Transfer controls have to be put in place. A PII cannot be shared directly with any third-party vendors without any reason, right? So all these things have to be analyzed in order to ensure that the controller and processor requirements are met.
Okay.
So when we go into the deep dive of all these requirements, right? So the first requirement, so all these requirements which you are seeing over here, these are according to the PIMS requirement, as well as most of the regulations talk about these requirements.
Okay.
So the first one is basically identifying the purpose of collection of personal data and processing of personal data. So suppose an organization is going to collect personal data for marketing activity, right?
Okay.
And that has to be documented as part of record of processing activity, and only for that particular purpose that personal data can be used.
True.
The data cannot be used for any other processing activity.
Okay.
That is where identifying the purpose and limiting the purpose becomes very, very important.
True.
Now, identifying the lawful basis for processing is also very important as per PIMS, as well as regulatory requirements. So depending on the regulation, there are various lawful bases which are defined. So first one can be consent. Second can be legitimate interest. It can be contractual requirement, or it can be as per the legal requirements of any other law. So for example, if you take banking laws, in that case, there might be a requirement to retain personal data for at least 15 years.
Yeah.
So that is where it is important to identify the lawful basis for which you are processing, maintaining, and retaining the particular data. However, a very important point to note here is, as soon as your processing activity cannot be linked to a lawful basis. So for example, if I am holding an account with a bank and I have closed my bank account 15 years ago, and as per banking laws, they need to delete my data, right? So that directly translates to the last box which you see here, data disposal.
Yeah.
And when a lawful basis cannot be associated with a particular processing activity, that particular processing activity for that particular data subject has to be seized and the data has to be deleted.
Okay.
That is very important. Now, consent is very important because you see a lot of regulations, demanding consents for processing. And there are even a lot of laws which, in fact, don't even have legitimate interest as one of the processing bases.
Yeah.
That is where it becomes extremely difficult to classify all your processing activity and implementing a consent-based mechanism to process personal data, right? Even though PIMS does not specifically state what are the lawful bases. It allows legitimate interest, it allows consent and everything. But if you take regulations into picture, consent becomes very, very important to actually take into consideration. Now, the next is basically privacy impact assessment. Privacy impact assessment is generally conducted by the controller as well as the processor, right?
Okay.
So it is important for both the organizations to understand what are the privacy risks which they are actually having and what are the steps they can take to mitigate all these privacy risks.
Okay.
So this is what happens in the privacy impact assessment.
Okay.
Contract. Yeah. You had any question?
Yeah. So I have one question on, like, when you say PIA, how important is basically the PIA from a consent point of view? Because sometimes what happens, we have a lack of visibility on some of the processes. In all the example, we are onboarding one of the application, which is a custom developed application from vendor. So what I've seen in a risk assessment, it is always a challenge to conduct assessment on those applications and all that. Will it be the same kind of issues in the case of PIA with those applications?
So PIA, what I'm trying to understand here is, so you're trying to procure a new solution
Product.
where...
Yeah, no solution. Yeah.
So in that case, see, PIA is something which is required. PIA is definitely required to understand the risk with respect to your department, or what kind of activities you will do in that particular product.
True.
But in this case, one more assessment should get triggered. That is the vendor assessment, vendor privacy risk assessment.
Okay.
So that happens on the actual product which you are actually procuring, right? Whether they follow the privacy by design guidelines, whether they meet with the PIMS requirement. So all those things have to be evaluated from a product perspective as well before you actually onboard it.
Yeah, that was a point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it is more from a contract, and it will be more from a process point of view instead of more into the in-house product and all, ML source code and all that. Okay.
Yes.
Fine.
Yes.
Fine.
So now when you talk about contract, so data processing agreements are basically extension to the existing contract. So these contracts basically talk about the various obligations which the PII processor has towards the PII controller. So for example, there is one very important clause which has to be included in data processing agreement, which is breach notification process, right?
Okay.
If you take GDPR, for GDPR, a controller has to report a breach within 72 hours of identification of the breach.
Yes, agree.
Whereas if you put the same kind of time limitation to a processor, then you will actually miss out on reporting the breach to the regulator.
Yeah, agree.
Right? So that's why contract has to be defined in a very clear way for breach management, that as soon as identification of a breach happens on the processor environment, within 24 or 48 hours of identification, it has to be reported to the controller so that the controller can do their analysis, they can do their assessment, and understand if the breach has to be reported to data subjects or if it has to be reported to any kind of regulator.
Okay.
That is where contract comes into picture, and it's very, very important to define SLAs and timelines for each and every privacy activity which is involved with the vendor.
Okay. Yeah, that was actually one of the case study we had where I face the same issues, and you give the very good solution. So I'm going to amend that in my next project. That's for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the next one is record of processing activity. So record of processing activity is nothing but one comprehensive document which contains all the processing activity of an organization related to all the departments. So be it HR, be it finance, be it operations, be it IT, all the processing activities will be defined, mentioned in that particular document. The owner of that particular processing activity will be mentioned. How exactly personal data is involved in that particular processing activity, how it is collected, where it is stored, how it is disclosed to other people, what are the third parties involved, if at all any cross-border data transfer happens, how the data is disposed. All these kind of data is actually maintained in record of processing activity, and this is one of the mandatory requirements of both PIMS as well as regulatory requirements. This gives a complete picture of all the processing activity within an organization which involves processing of personal data.
Okay, fine.
Now coming to the data subject rights. Data subject rights, as I explained before, these are rights which are actually given to the data subjects or the individuals who are actually involved within your organization. So they might be having various kind of rights, such as right to access information, right to rectification, or right to erasure, or right to deletion, or right to portability as well, as per GDPR, right? So all these kinds of rights have to be enabled. And these rights need to have certain workflows built within an organization to ensure that, if at all an organization receives this kind of right, what are the steps which are needed to be taken in order to fulfill the request. And a very, very key important point over here is it's not always possible to fulfill all these requests, right?
Understood.
Because if an organization receives right to erasure of data, an organization simply cannot erase all the personal data related to the person. An organization might want to retain that personal data as per any other law. They might want to retain the data if any legal or court proceeding is happening, right? In all these cases, data will have to be retained, and the right to erasure may not be able to, maybe the organization may not be able to honor this particular right. That is where a workflow has to be created. Different responsibilities have to be defined within the workflow to ensure that all these checks are done before responding to our data subject rights.
Yeah, that's the most important point. Fine.
Now, coming to privacy by design. Privacy by design, as we discussed before, basically involves various privacy controls to be implemented at the stage of development of a product or a software. and also throughout the life cycle of this software or a product, what are the various privacy controls which have to be kept and which have to be enhanced. So all these controls are defined by privacy by design.
So it is like a security by design, like
exactly.
we start security as a design stage. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Fine.
But here it operates on the privacy principles like transparency, accountability, and all other kind of privacy principles on which the privacy by design operates.
Okay.
Now, transfer basis is very similar to identifying of lawful basis. So transfer basis differ a bit because a transfer cannot happen simply because an organization wants to do it.
Okay.
Right? Because you're ideally transferring a personal data of a person from a controller to processor. And collecting data on a lawful basis cannot directly translate to transfer of. So for example, if I am giving consent to your organization to collect my data, but I do not give my consent for you to transfer personal data to another organization, right?
True.
So you might collect my data on the basis of legitimate interest.
Okay.
But you cannot use same legitimate interest to transfer my data. So in that case, you might have to transfer it based on consent. And that is where you need to involve, again, a consent management mechanism. You need to take my consent to transfer personal data to another organization.
Okay.
And same happens in case of cross-border data transfer. So there are various regulations. So for example, if you take Saudi Arabia, there is a requirement for data localization, right? And in that case, data cannot move out of Saudi Arabia under no circumstances.
Okay.
In that case, if at all, a transfer has to happen outside Saudi Arabia. The transfer basis has to be actually defined. And there are certain approvals which have to be taken according to Saudi Arabian PDPL in order to ensure that the transfer can happen. But again, this is not something which I'm claiming right now. This is just the draft. The PDPR itself is at a very draft stage right now. But this is just an example which I'm giving. So there might be cases wherein the transfer basis and the lawful basis might vary, and the organizations might have to take different kind of approaches for collecting data as well as transferring data.
Understood. Fine.
Now, marketing and advertising is a very, very debated topic and a very, very controversial topic in most of the organizations because
agree.
Marketing basically leads to revenue generation, whereas privacy is generally considered, which is against revenue generation. So marketing and advertising mostly has to happen on the basis of consent. So an organization can definitely not rely on legitimate interest for for sending out marketing emails, for sending out targeted advertisements and all. So this has to happen based on marketing on the basis of consent. And organizations have to take very important decisions related to all of these because there are various kind of marketing organizations which get involved in the marketing ecosystem itself. So appropriate contracts have to be deployed across organizations. So for example, an organization might actually purchase a marketing database, right, in order to send out marketing emails. So appropriate contracts have to be assigned with that particular owner of the data in order to ensure that they obtain the particular data and they use it for a purpose for which they have purchased the particular marketing database, right? And once they purchase it and they want to use it for any additional purpose, they need to contact the data subject and get their consent to use that particular data for any other purpose. So marketing and advertising becomes highly complex when privacy is taken into consideration. And most of the marketing and advertisement happens on the basis of consent only.
And I have this is a live example. Initially when Uber was introduced in India, driver has a phone number of us. So when we call, they can see our number, and if we cancel the cab, they can directly call and tell them why the reason. And now, to balance the business and privacy, they have started masking of number, right? Like you call on Uber app and the number get masked, and what they can see is a different number. Same with Zomato also. It's up to you. You want to give the complete house number with flat number, or you just give the building name, so you can pick the things from the ground floor.
That's right.
So that is how we have to balance the marketing and privacy. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That is right. I mean, see, privacy is not what do I say? It's not against marketing. It's just it just supports good practices for marketing to ensure that personal data is not misutilized.
It should not exploit. Yeah.
So I mean, till now, I mean, from the morning, I have received almost like 6 to 7 spam messages on my, SMS inbox. And
Okay.
I have never supplied my SMS, my mobile number to all of these companies. So that is where that is why, this controls comes into picture in terms of privacy.
Understood.
Yeah.
Fine.
Now, infringement instruction is nothing but data breach notification. In PIMS, it is called as infringement instruction. In
Okay.
regulations, it is called as data breach notification. Again, it has two components. So if a data breach happens, whether the data breach has to be reported to the regulator,
Okay.
and whether the data breach has to be reported to the data subjects.
Fine.
Both of these have to be assessed depending on the impact of the data breach, and accordingly, a conscious call has to be taken by the organization.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to transfer, retention, and disposal, again, transfer can happen only based on mostly consent. And retention and disposal is something which the organization needs to define depending on the business requirement. So a PIMS requirement or a data privacy law will never say that data has to be retained for 10 years, 15 years. It will not specify a period. It will only specify that the data has to be retained till the time it is meeting the lawful basis of processing or the purpose for which it was collected. That is it. So these are the, overview of all the controller and processor requirements according to PIMS. Now, moving on to the documentation aspect, which is the key to success of any privacy program, right? So the first document which has to be created is a privacy policy. And this privacy policy acts as the master document for all the procedures which are developed based on the policy.
Okay.
And privacy policy is to be made available to all the employees of an organization, right?
Okay.
So when it comes to procedure, a dedicated procedure has to be created for data subject rights. And this is very important because there are multiple workflows which are involved in data subject rights. As I mentioned, there are multiple kinds of rights in data subject rights, and thus multiple workflows will need to be created within the data subject rights procedure.
Okay.
Breach management procedure should actually have assessment of the breach, what kind of threat and impact it is having, the breach is having. Such assessment should be mentioned in the breach management procedure, and guidance should be given on whether the breach should be reported to a regulator or a data subject or both.
So there is a proper documentation for that we have.
Yes. All of these documents are independent, and all of these documents are mandatory to have a good privacy program.
Great.
Okay. Now the next is consent management. As I said, consent is again an extremely complex topic, because if at all an organization does not process any kind of personal data on the basis of legitimate, the next best alternative is to rely on consent. And there are various laws which do not even, which states that consent is the primary basis of processing. That is where a lot of processes have to be processed on based of consent.
Okay.
That's why a dedicated document is required to explain how exactly consent has to be obtained, how exactly the consents can be revoked if the data subjects do not want to provide the consent anymore, or if there is a concept called reconsent, right? Or so suppose the data subject has provided its consent for a period of 1 year.
Okay.
And after 1 year, the data subject is no longer associated with your organization or doesn't want to be related to your organization. In that case, the organizations have an option to send out a reconsent form.
Okay.
And if at all if the data subject wants to remain associated, they can reconsent to it, or else they can revoke the consent.
Okay.
So this is where reconsent also comes into the picture. And all these are actually defined in the consent management procedure.
Okay.
Cookies are dedicatedly treated, in a very important manner in most of the privacy regulation. And this was not until GDPR, right? And GDPR treated cookies as personal data because it might actually also collect IP address and other kind of personal data through the browser settings. So cookie management also involves various kind of technologies which have to be implemented. So for example, it is a preference center or be it, a dashboard which has to be monitored on a regular basis, or a cookie banner has to be deployed. So all these have to be defined in the cookie management procedure.
Understood.
So PIA and a DPIA procedure or a methodology document will basically talk about how exactly to assess privacy risk, under what circumstances these privacy risks will have to be evaluated, and how exactly risk treatment plans have to be generated for every PIA which is conducted across an organization.
Okay.
Audit plan is very similar to how it is created for an internal audit. So
Okay.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time
Sure,
on it. It's
sure,
very
sure.
similar.
Same with
And
risk
risk register
also.
is also very similar to a security risk register, wherein we highlight the threat and impact, and we assess the risk, and we create a treatment plan for all these risks.
Okay.
Now, the consent notice and privacy notice we just discussed. So one difference is there between consent notice and a privacy notice. So a privacy notice is basically deployed on a generic way at the bottom of a website, if you generally observe.
Okay.
That contains all the processing activity and all the personal data elements, why it is collected, why it is processed, and how exactly privacy rights can be exercised. Whereas a consent notice is deployed right next to a consent checkbox. When you often register or in any website, right? So you might read terms and conditions, and a hyperlink is given to the terms and conditions.
Okay.
So it is very similar to that. A consent notice is a hyperlink which is given on a website, which will talk about why exactly that consent is collected and how exactly that consent or the personal data which is collected will be used.
Okay.
Fine. There are organizations which generally combine consent notice or privacy notice, but it can be kept separate as well. It is completely up to the organization.
Okay.
And ROPA is something which we just discussed. It is a repository of all the processing activities which are undertaken by an organization.
Okay.
Yeah. Now coming to the industry focus area. Mostly, if you see any kind of privacy regulation, it does not cover generally the public entities or the government entities, right? And that is where we have seen a lot of traction coming from government entities and public entities asking for PIMS implementation. And this is so because they want to set standard and show to the citizens or residents of their particular country that they are also complying to all the privacy requirements and they have equal rights to contact them and ensure that all their data is protected.
Okay.
Now, the other sector which we are seeing a lot of traction is BFSI. And BFSI is very important because, they're already highly regulated. They already have a lot of laws to implement and, even the banking laws have privacy requirements.
True.
And PIMS is a concept which is actually regulation agnostic, right? It covers all the privacy concepts from all the regulations. So banks generally have a tendency to implement PIMS program in their organization to ensure that they are meeting to the privacy regulation as well as the banking regulations.
So from your experience point of view, Suhas, like which industry, finance is there, but if you keep aside of finance, what is the next biggest challenge we can see in the industry? Like which industry has a biggest challenge when you're managing a privacy? Government, telecom, or retail?
Telecom also has.
It's very dynamic.
Yeah, it is very dynamic, and that involves a lot of personal data. We can't even imagine the kind of personal data telecom is actually handling, right? Because there is continuous call recording which happens. There is continuous, monitoring of all the messages which happens. So all these are directly linked to personal data.
Agree.
And telecom itself has certain, regulatory requirements which involves privacy. But again, PIMS implementation actually helps them to comply to multi-regulatory environment. That is why telecom industries are also approaching us a lot to implement PIMS program. But again, out of all these four which you are seeing, government is the main entities. Government organizations or government bodies are primarily the target audience for PIMS.
Okay. Fine.
Now, talking about key challenges, right? Talking about PIMS. PIMS is, as I said, it's not a one-time activity. It's a continuous activity, right? So that is where stakeholder buy-in comes into picture. And stakeholder buy-in is just not a one-time activity. It's just not like the leadership agrees to certain set of implementation of controls and then they forget about it. It's not like that. A stakeholder buy-in should be in such a way that it sustains for a long period of time, right? That is where the privacy strategy also comes into picture to get a stakeholder buy-in, to ensure that they get involved in each and every implementation phase of privacy. Okay. Next is budget and resource constraint. I'll be very honest with you. Privacy is an expensive affair, right? When it comes to implementation of technology, not when it comes to the functional aspects. So privacy technologies. So for example, if you want to implement any kind of encryption mechanism, that itself becomes very expensive for organizations, especially if it is a small and medium-sized company.
Okay.
Right? So budget constraints, but budget allocation becomes extremely difficult. Budget approval becomes extremely difficult. And also resource constraints. Resource constraint, when I say it's appointing appropriate team to manage data privacy.
Okay.
I have seen a lot of organizations who try to, put in their information security guys into privacy, right? They think that privacy can be handled by information security guys. I'm not saying it cannot be done, but what needs to be done is given appropriate training and appropriate cross-skilling has to be done.
Okay.
If that is too much, then it is better to appoint a separate privacy team in order to ensure that the privacy program does not get in the way of security implementation.
Okay. And that is a reason that when it comes to we have everything on papers, but when it comes to cost part, back to zero.
Yes.
We can implement everything, but cost is the biggest factor. Yeah, that is how
cost is the biggest factor in privacy and security both.
That's true. I agree.
Yeah. Now, lack of proper data architecture. Why this plays a when I say data architecture, this is basically the quality of data which the organization is having. And this is very important because if at all you store incorrect data about a person, or you're not keeping up-to-date data of a person, right? Then the organization can directly face any legal implication.
True.
So that is where it is important to have a proper data structure in place. The quality of data has to be maintained, and the end consumers or the data subject, they must be given an option to update their data as and when required, provided there is a valid justification, right? So we have seen organizations which, so if you take any kind of database, there might be a lot of columns or a lot of entries which are empty, or they might be there might not be proper data validation which is happening before they input the data into databases, right? So that is where proper data validation has to be done, and a proper data set has to be maintained to ensure that the privacy program is a success.
Okay.
And this is a piece which most of the people miss out. So I'll give you one more example over here. So when data scanning is one of the basic personal data scanning is one of the basic requirements when it comes to implementation of privacy program. And when you scan personal data, and if you don't have the appropriate output, right, then you'll not be able to understand what kind of personal data you're handling, or what kind of personal data is related to what kind of processing activity.
True.
So your basic core of the program itself gets affected when you don't have proper data.
True.
So that's where having a proper data architecture is very important. The next one is resistance to change. So a lot of business departments might think privacy as an overhead for them.
Okay.
So if you say that, so for one very very, very important change which I saw in one of my previous organization is that in the Teams meeting, the recording function was actually disabled because video and audio is also considered as personal data as per law, right? So once this particular control was actually implemented, and if at all a recording has to be done, a management approval was to be taken. So this kind of control was put in place.
Okay.
So, but the practice before this kind of control was that each and every call was recorded so that minutes of meeting could be created, or any kind of reference which has to be done could have been done.
Okay.
Now, to adjust to this kind of a change in order to protect personal data, it took a lot of time for people to get accustomed to, because they could not refer back to the meeting immediately. They had to take handwritten notes, or they had to take any kind of notes on their MS Word.
Yeah.
And they had to translate everything into the Word document and send out minutes of meeting. This was a very big challenge we faced.
Okay.
So this is this is one of the examples of resistance to change which I'm giving, right? It takes time, but the change has to happen.
I have seen a lot of time where strategy part, they are not very, like example post-COVID, people are working from home.
Yes.
So that was the biggest change in terms of compliance and GRC. I agree. But now
yes.
it's become a habit. Yeah.
Yes. Now the next challenge is adoption of privacy automation. Now, there are multiple challenges associated with this. First thing is the kind of how exactly the organization wants to approach this automation, right? So we have seen organization which wants to do the consulting engagement as well as privacy automation hand in hand, so that the implementation time is reduced, right? But one of the key challenges in that is a lot of effort is required from the customer's end or the
Okay.
organization's end to ensure that all the teams come together and the technical teams, the design teams, everyone comes together within that short span of time to implement this kind of a big change.
Okay.
But there is one more very big challenge which we see is that budget constraints. Similar to security requirements, security cost, privacy automation cost is also very expensive.
True.
And especially for a small and medium-sized company, they prefer to have everything in a manual way rather than going for privacy automation.
Okay.
Right? So cost becomes another biggest challenge when it comes to implementing of a PIMS program.
Okay.
Now, as we discussed before, if metrics are not defined properly, you cannot have a continually improving privacy program.
Okay.
If you do not measure the success of each and every module of your
That's
privacy
fact.
in the right way, you cannot improve on it.
That's
right?
true.
And training and upskilling. Training is something which is, very, very surprising to us, because what generally companies do is they generally just subscribe to any kind of online platform.
True.
They just select certain modules from the online platform and they just give the training to the employees. They say that these are the training which you need to attend within the next probably 3-4 weeks. They give a timeline like this. And what happens in this is people just keep on skipping the slides, or they just leave the videos on, and there's no actual knowledge enhancement which is happening, right? And that is where actual training comes into picture, and organizations need to make sure that batches of employees are sent to actual virtual trainings, which will actually make them interact with the data privacy office or the training providers to understand the concepts, so that they understand the importance of privacy.
That is why we say, gamification is a new concept, or interactive
Exactly.
sessions, which is basically make them aware about, okay, how things works. You need, if you click on this link, what is the impact? So that might be the reason that, that is how the mode of training got changed, I believe.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So see trainings again, for a technology person, data privacy training is a very, very dry subject.
True.
Right? They would not even pay attention to whatever is being taught. And what you have said is extremely right. I mean, once you start gamification and once you start any kind of interaction with the technology person, right, then they will actually start understanding what kind of importance privacy plays in their day-to-day job.
Okay.
Right. So
Okay.
yeah, training and upskilling is also one of the key challenges, and organizations are still not sure what kind of privacy certifications to take up, or how exactly to upskill their existing resources. And that is where training providers like you come into picture, which in which you basically can guide them in order to help them reskill and upskill on the privacy aspects.
Okay. Great.
I think that is it. I mean, we have come to the end of the session, so we can discuss any points which you want to discuss about.
Thanks, Suhas, and it was a very detailed presentation along with the examples, and I'm truly amazed with the knowledge that you have shared on this particular session. And I'm sure those who are watching this video, I'm 100% sure that they will find a very useful insights, you can say, from this particular video. My questions got answered already in that video, so in the session, sorry. So there's no doubt. But this is the pointer for everyone who watching this video. Do let me know if you want Suhas again on this session. And if you want Suhas to be part of the next session, let me know which topic would you suggest on privacy in a comment box. So I'm going to disturb Suhas again. I'm going to take his time to have. And I think Suhas is also open for counseling. If someone want to reach out to Suhas, I will share the LinkedIn profile of Suhas in the description box. So by this, they can reach out to Suhas, and I'm sure Suhas definitely going to help them also. that is how we grow in the industry. That is how we
Yes.
give back to the society. But but I would like to give one feedback, Suhas, of this particular session is, for me it was completely an eye opener. To be frank, I have a different assumption about privacy, but this is something, a very detailed insight. And I was part of one of the project, and initially, where I was be a helping hand to the privacy officer from a security point of view, where some of the terms which you have referred, now I got to know why he was using or she was using that terms and all that. But thanks to you, at least nowadays, even you go for the commercial training, you won't get that value. But I'm sure this video, which is basically free of stuff for everyone, I'm sure it will generate some revenue, in their life, or you can say it generates some kind of a interest or some kind of a value in their career. I'm sure it will be a great hit. I'm 100% sure.
Thank you so much, Prabh, for these kind words. And as you said, I mean, it's not just privacy, right? Even security is a field which involves a lot of networking to understand the various developments which are happening.
True.
And that is where more and more people should come together, start brainstorming various topics, start discussing various developments which are happening in the industry, in order for us to grow as a professional. And I'm really looking forward to having further sessions with you, and spreading as much as limited knowledge as I have. And
You have, and kudos to you, the way you maintain the knowledge, you maintain things. Because before that, I had interview Aparna Pathak. I'm sure you know her. She's from Tata, and she also shared her experience on PIMS and all that. And this is the next important thing. So this was a very much in detail. I can say that both are in detail, but some of the doubts which I have in PIMS, it got answered in today's video. So
Thank you so much for that, Prabh. I'm glad that I could at least spread some kind of information.
And we will looking forward for more session like that. As a subscriber, from my point of view, I will definitely look for more session and keep writing, because I have seen a lot of articles you are sharing on LinkedIn. Keep writing. That's the most important thing. And so this is all from my side. So I was just want to say thank you for this particular session. Do you have any few words for our subscribers, or few words for the aspiring privacy experts or privacy candidates who making their career in privacy?
Definitely, yes. So as I said in the beginning of the call, right? Don't think of privacy as something which you can just take upon and just get started into, right? This involves a lot of effort. Understand that in the beginning. I'm not saying it's impossible, but pursuing a privacy requires continuous knowledge growth. You need to continuously read. You need to continuously keep yourself appraised of what is happening in the industry, and start reading, start taking up certifications, start gaining experience, get into various projects, get into various study groups. There are multiple study groups available online. Get into those, and be a part of IAPP chapter events, and start networking. That is the only way you will be able to grow.
You get experience, you get understanding about how things works.
Yes.
That's agree too. Yeah.
Yes, and I wish everyone who's aspiring to become a privacy professional all the best. And I'm actually looking forward to you all connecting over LinkedIn, and we can have a healthy discussion as and when required.
And we will also have one more session.
Definitely, Prabh. Yeah.
Prabh, because Suhas was thinking this guy is on air, he trying to blackmailing me. But I'd really after the after this particular session, I'm sure I will definitely receive a lot of comments if we want Suhas again on this particular session. And Suhas, are you open for those sessions if we get a request?
Definitely, yeah.
We
can plan that. Yes.
Thank you so much. So team, this is all from our side. If you find this video useful, do share your network, and do share your suggestions in a comment box, and do subscribe to the channel for more updates. And we're looking forward for more comments, feedback from your side to improve this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Prabh.
Yeah.